All right, so transmission media. Now, right off the bat, anyone have any idea what different types of transmission medias we have? You want to type it out, unmute yourself and talk. Really need to get that Jeopardy music. Nobody wants to give it a shot. All right, well, we will go through them. So, the first thing that we need to understand is bandwidth. All right. Um, Many of you have probably heard of bandwidth as, dealing with how fast your internet is and those types of things. And yes, overall, that is what our bandwidth is. You probably have an upload bandwidth at home and a download bandwidth at home, and they're going to be different on most home internet connections. Not all. I think Verizon's fiber is actually the same up as and down. But most of them are different up versus down. I know with Antietam cable here, we have a 50 megabit per second download link and a 5 megabit per second upload. Yeah, 10 times slower on the upload than the download. Now, for most people, having that difference isn't really an issue. Most of what we do on the internet is consume content. So we are downloading things from the internet. We're watching videos, we're listening to music, you're downloading your school files, those types of things. So it's not really an issue in the long run. However, for some people, it is an issue. And it's those people who are constantly uploading things to the So if you are a YouTube content creator, which I am overall by no means a YouTube content creator, but obviously I do upload things to the internet for you guys. So as you can see here, come on in. I'm uploading a file right now. I still have 5 minutes left on this upload. Now, this is not a small file by any means. I would actually probably call this more of a large file. Where is it? There we go. This is half a gig almost. All right. But it's still going to take me a while to upload that at my 5 megabits per second. All right. Now, so just kind of something to think about. Not really again, normally an issue for most people, but whenever you're dealing with high data consumption, dealing with high data consumption, that is something that you may want to keep in the back of your mind. This is measured in bits per second. All right, we're dealing with bits here. Now, if we remember, we talked about bits versus bytes last class. Anyone remember what's the difference between 1 bit and how many bytes? Yes, a byte is 8 bits. Excellent, thank you, Cheyenne. All right, so we're talking in megabits per second. And the really kind of annoying thing here is a lot of time when you're downloading something, it's telling you in megabytes per second, which drives me bonkers. Like, can't we kind of pick a standard here and stick with it? So it's like, well, my internet tells me in bits per second, but the upload's in bytes per second. So then you're like, why am I only getting a 1 megabyte per second upload or download? And it's like, well, it's megabytes, so really that's 80 megabits per second, or 8 megabits per second. So if you only have a 10 megabit per second connection, that's basically your whole connection right there. So that's probably pretty darn good for you. But that is one of those things that you do need to actually keep track of. So as I said, we do have a difference from a download versus an upload. Now, we also have baseband versus broadband. All right, baseband is technology that transmits a single data signal stream channel at a time. All right, so it's one single stream of information. This is going to be a digital signal. It does support bidirectional communication, so we can go an upload and a download, which is really nice. And we're going to have probably 2 different electrical circuits here. So we're going to have one for sending, one for receiving. All right, so like Ethernet in your house would be baseband in the long run. All right, we have one connection between your house, your computer, and your router or whatever else. It can go both directions, so we can send and receive at the same time. But it's still only a single kind of connection. So only one signal is going out on that at a time. Now that could be coming from multiple sources, so we could have multiple different computers trying to access your server at the same time. but it's still only one stream of information. So the router may be going, okay, here's this packet for this, then here's this packet for that. So it's actually sending multiple different groups of information at once. It's kind of like, putting them in line. So it's this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. So you're getting packets from each different type of connection, but it's all coming through a single connection point. All right, one data channel or stream. All right. So that would be baseband. So your Wi-Fi at home, and I guess you could argue your Wi-Fi would actually almost be more broadband nowadays because you can get multiple signal channels and multiple different frequencies all getting beamed to your computer at once. So that one might be more of a broadband than a baseband. But like an Ethernet connection, that is going to be a baseband. Now, broadband technology transmits multiple data signal streams channels simultaneously at the same time. And one of the big things here, one of the biggest difference between baseband and broadband is baseband is digital, broadband is analog. All right. Now, analog is obviously varying the voltage level or the current level or something along those. So something is physically changing. It's not a 1 or a 0. It's not an on or off. All right. We actually have some variability there. Yeah. So this mixes digital data, digital signal, and binary values into the carrier wave and sends the carrier wave across the channel / medium. All right. So carrier wave. All right. What is a carrier wave? And I'm not sure. We'll come back to. Yeah, we can talk about that. So a carrier wave is a consistent frequency that is being transmitted. All right, or that the frequency that your data is being transmitted on. All right. So if we can take this a little back old school here, talk about the radio. Yeah, your car. A little old school, right? You guys all just stream everything anymore. But the radio in your car, when you tune to, 1021, I think is a station around here. Yeah, I do listen to the radio, but my car just is always set on that preset button, so I don't actually remember the channels. But 1021, you stream to that, it's like that is the carrier wave frequency. So that is the frequency that all the data is getting added on to. All right, so we take all of our carrier wave from point A, we take our data from point B, and we kind of merge them together. And there are different ways to merge them. One is called frequency modulation, or FM, and the other one's called amplitude modulation, which is AM. Holy crap, right? Makes sense. So that's where we got AM and FM from. So frequency modulations, we're actually changing how fast the frequency is for that data. So if we're sending a whole lot of ones, our frequency would probably get closer. If we're sending a whole lot of zeros, the frequency would get farther away. With amplitude, we're changing the value from trough to trough. So we're changing that peak to peak. So if, we're sending 102.1 megahertz signal out at, say, 3 volts. Amplitude modulation would maybe make it from 2 volts to 4 volts instead for that, and that's how we're encoding our information on it. So kind of crazy there. We do have frequency division or multiplexing, which divides the channel, medium, or path into several subchannels and assigns a subchannel to each node. All right. Now I thought that I took a picture of this. I did. It's in a bit later. So we'll come back to that. But anyway, so we take, we can take that single channel or whatever, and we can divide into multiple frequencies. So whenever you hear the term 2.4 gigahertz for Wi-Fi, it's not strictly 2.4 gigahertz exactly. There is a small range for that Wi-Fi there, where you can actually have the frequency. I think 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi has, I want to say, 11 channels on it. So they've taken, say, like 2.35 to 2.45 gigahertz, and they've divided that into 11 different channels. So each one is roughly, what, 0.009 gigahertz, somewhere like that. But anyway, they've divided into a whole bunch of smaller channels, and that allows us to not completely saturate the entire environment whenever there's Wi-Fi around and have everybody have interference issues. So, the other thing about this is it's only one way. All right, right? In our cars, our radios don't communicate back to the radio stations. All we do is the radio stations just broadcast. They go, hey, whoever wants to listen to this, here you go. You can listen to it. But you don't have to listen to it if you don't want to. But it's here for you. We have no clue how many people are listening to it. We have no information on that. We don't get any information back from you. All it is here's the information. So if you want to have two-direction communication, you have to set up a specific different frequency or whatever to communicate the opposite way on. All right. Now, when it comes to our communication mediums, there are three different options: copper, fiber optic, and wireless. All right. Now, when you are dealing with this choice of how you're going to communicate, whenever we're working with internally, it is completely up to your business. Your business could say, we're going to do everything over copper, which is fine. You know, we can have very high-speed copper internet connections now. I think we can go up to at least 2.5 gigabit per second, if not 5 gigabit per second over Ethernet at this point in time, which is, you know, overall really freaking fast. Now, when you start thinking about a server and all the information that people are asking from it and things like that, that might not be fast enough. So that might mean, so okay, maybe now that server needs to connect to the switch over fiber optic instead of copper, or things like that. So, but yeah, anytime we're internal, it's going to be completely up to the business to make that decision. Once you leave your business, once you hit that modem that connects to the real world, you've lost all possible options and choices here. It is now completely up to whoever your internet service provider is to go from your business to their hub, and then from their hub to wherever else it's going is, again, completely out of your control. It's actually out of, I don't know whose control that is at that point. But once you're on like the internet, man, it's anyone's guess. Most likely it's going to be fiber optic from that point on, from your main ISP or internet service provider on, but it still could go for some copper at points. So just something to think about. And then wireless, mostly short distance is what we're dealing with, right? But we could actually get into some longer distance stuff, which we'll talk about in a little bit. All right, so contemporary data comms. All right, so on the right here, I have a nice little figure. I really like this figure. And it shows you different types of activities and what type of speed it is that you need. All right. So if you are just going to transact, do some processing of some transactions, right? You're trying to, charge someone's credit card. We only need 9.6 kilobits per second or 9,600 bits per second. So we need a very slow internet connection there. Anything above that would be wonderful. Fun fact, I used to work at CVS. CVS, and man, that was 2000. Yeah, 2012, 2013, I think is when my last summer there was. That was my summer gig when I was in college. Yeah, my entire time there at CVS till 2013, they only had a phone line for internet. There was no high-speed internet in that building. It was purely a phone line. So we're dealing with a very low communication speed, all right? I think about modems way back when there was 56K, right? 5,600 bits per second. So we're, roughly in this category right here. I don't know if they've gotten any better since then, but that was all our transaction speed was a phone line. CVS didn't see the need to go to anything faster than that for processing, again, transactions. There wasn't a whole lot that we did that needed internet on at CVS. But nowadays, I'm pretty sure they did get updated to like, a normal internet service provider. But, it was cheaper for CVS just to say, yep, here's a modem, connect to the internet through that, than to have to pay a different, high-speed internet cost. So kind of interesting there. But yeah, so transaction processing, that would be fine. Messaging and text, again, pretty low. When we start getting up to still image transfers, right, you're dealing with like a 3 meg file. Assuming it's a megabit, not megabyte. Let's go ahead and just quick look, right? I've got pictures on this computer. This one's only 600 kilobytes, but it is bytes. All right. Now we start needing to get into that higher transfer speed if you want it done in what I'm going to call an acceptable amount of time. All right. Internet and VPN access, again, pretty low. Well, again, we keep getting up, but still 64K, that's still pretty stinking slow, right? When we start getting to here, now we're at 2 megabit. That's what this tops out as, 2 megabit per second. And you can stream at least 720, if not 1080p video over a 2 meg connection. So like you can get very nice very nice high quality video that lasts. Here's my that last option on this chart. You can get that over a over a normal 2 megabit connection. So you don't need a super high connection. Now, if you're trying to stream video and your roommate's trying to stream video and your other roommate's trying to stream video, everyone's using up 2 megs, all of a sudden now you need 6. All right. So something to contemplate. Now, I remember when we first got internet out here, when we moved here, we got Antietam's lowest connection, 10 meg down, 1 meg up. And it wasn't until I started doing this wonderful online teaching from home and uploading videos that we were like, time to get a faster internet speed, because uploading videos is going to take ages. I mean, it's going to take 5 times longer than what it is right now. So we got better internet at that point. But, for me and my wife, 2 people, we both had, high quality videos, we weren't going to be touching that 10 meg connection. So it wasn't really an issue, but it is just something that we do need to think about. So traffic growth is at a high and steady rate. As we all enjoy more videos, we're enjoying higher quality videos instead of watching 1080p. Now maybe you're watching 2K or 4K videos on YouTube. That transfer rate just goes higher and higher and higher and higher. And again, the more people doing it, the more more internet speed you have. I remember we were buying a new TV for our house because our old one, the backlight died, and I tried to fix it, and I cracked the screen putting it back together. It was fixed. It was working. And then when I put the bezel back on, I cracked the screen. I was so mad at myself. But that's a different story for another day. But anyway, so we got a new TV, and it was 4K Roku-based TV, and people were complaining about it. Like, yeah, this made my internet bill go up. And I guess, with again, going from 1080p to 4K, you're having 4 times the data. No, not 4. A whole lot more than 4K. Oh, man. But you're adding a whole lot more data requirements. So if you have a limited amount of data, which on TDM you do have, all of a sudden they're using more than their allotted amount. So now they had to pay extra for their internet because they were streaming at 4K instead of 1080. Personally, 1080 is fine for me. I'm not doing anything that crazy. But, to each their own. So we are having traffic growth at a high and steady rate. And as more and more things come in, it's going to get worse and worse. All right. New services are developing. We are moving to a world, which I absolutely hate, of software as a service. All right. And what that means is you don't do anything on your computer, right? You don't install programs on your computer. Everything is done through the internet. For example, Microsoft Office has an online version of Microsoft Office. And unless you specifically tell it to download the file to your computer, it stays on the cloud. I hate not having control over my data. If I make a file, I want it stored on my computer because I know where it is. If I don't have internet, I can still access it. And even though we do live in a world where internet is pretty stable for the most part, for most of us, all right, it's not a guaranteed thing, all right. I have been places where I'm like, I need this file, and I'm like, on an airplane or whatever, and it's like, I don't have access to that file because it's, on the cloud right now. So I hate software as a service. I'd much rather install the software on my computer, have the file stored on my computer and everything else, and let me decide how files get uploaded to the internet, which I do upload my files to the internet as a backup with Google Drive. But I want to be the one to decide how that gets uploaded, not let Microsoft say everything gets uploaded. That's where it stays. All right. This also keeps companies from screwing you out of your data, right? If you do use an online provider, so like I use Google Photos to back up all my Google Photos, not all my Google Photos, all my photos, period. Come June, whatever, Google's going to start making you pay if you upload too many photos. It used to be completely free, so they've kind of hook, line, and sinker, right? They said, hey, here's this free thing, and you're like, oh, well, sounds good to me. I'm in. They got me with it. And after years and years of them basically saying, yeah, hey, it's free, it's free, it's free. Now they're going to go in June. They're going to go, nope, it's now going to cost you. I'm like, well, now what do I do with all my pictures that I want to keep backed up? So until June, it's still free, and all the pictures I have uploaded will stay free after June. But if I upload too many more pictures, then there goes my free storage. So look, they've got me on the hook, and then they just yank it out of my mouth at some point. Go, hey, now we've got you, ha ha ha. But yeah, so new services, everything is being offered on the internet nowadays, and that kind of bothers me. In businesses, we are needing those high-speed LANs. All right. Let me tell you, it's really nice having a gigabit network connection between 2 different computers. I mean, they're all of 3 feet apart, but transferring files between them is so much nicer at those high speeds. And even not only locally, which is what this high-speed LAN is, so LAN is local area connection. Corporate also needs wide internet networks, so wide area. And that is dealing with, from one business location to another. HCC even has off-site campus locations. We have a trucking center up by the airport. We have a group down at the mall. We need a wide area network so that those students can come onto HCC's campus virtually from those locations and still able to access everything. And it needs to be done at a high speed. All right. Centralizing servers and things like that make those wide area networks absolutely necessary. So you need to have some high speed backbone network connections and those types of things. The rapid conversion of consumer electronics to digital technology is also having an impact on both internet and corporate internets, dramatically increasing the amount of image and video traffic carried by networks. Man, I mean, Netflix was already a huge user of like the main backbone of the internet, right? I mean, there was unfathomable amounts of Netflix information being pushed there. And then COVID happened, and what happened? I think that skyrocketed even higher. So kind of crazy to think about how much network traffic Netflix is using. So a lot of things are going on. So network is just constantly upgrading, constantly growing. 20, 30 years, we may have fiber optics going to every computer in your house instead of having a copper Ethernet connection once the cost of fiber optic equipment comes down, which it is constantly coming down. So let's go ahead and focus on the first option of copper. I should say, any questions? Again, if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me. Copper cable performance. All right, so we are sending electrical signals over copper wire, and I don't have a good access. Here's one. Aha, copper wire. All right, so here I have a standard Ethernet cable. All right. It's got an RJ45 connector on the end. It's nice straight through cable, probably one that came free with something. All right, so it's really probably not the highest quality cable in the world. Just a fun side note, if you're ever dealing with copper cable of any sort and you actually read the writing on there, it does tell you what it is. So if I read through this, it should tell me. I always hate reading this stuff because you have to go forever. This is Cat5e, which we will come back to at a later point in time. But anyway, all signals going through anything electrical are going to degrade over time. All right, it's a requirement. All right, there is resistance in electrical wires. Sending a signal over there is always some energy being converted to heat. So we are going to have our signals degrade. All right. So no matter what medium we are sending things through, those signals are going to degrade, but copper is not immune to this. All right. This is because the amplitude decreases as the medium resists flow of energy. So as I said, in electrical cables, the resistance converts that energy into heat. All right. As signals distort, the higher frequency are attenuated more than lower ones. So if we're trying to transfer things at a higher rate, we're going to have more attenuation. Now, what is attenuation? That is the decrease in signal strength measured in decibels per unit length, or dB. Decibels is dB. All right. So in networking environments, repeaters are responsible for regenerating a signal before passing it on. Now, how far can you go with Ethernet cable or whatever cable? And that is always the game that is going to be played. As we get to higher data bandwidth, you need higher levels of network cable. So I said this is a Cat5 cable. Again, we'll come back to that in a little bit. We'll talk about some of those differences there. Basically any time you've plugged this into an electrical device, a switch, a router, a hub, those types of things, those are all actually repeating the signal. So they are going to take the signal in, bring the voltage back up to the proper level, and send it back out the other side wherever it's trying to go. So even if they don't advertise them as repeaters, they are probably still repeaters. You can buy specific devices that are just purely repeaters. So all they are is, it's just basically, okay, here it is, send it out, we're good to go. That's the whole job of it. Ooh. And the question again is, how far can we send these signals without having to repeat them? And that depends a lot on the cable you're using and the electrical data, the communication style we're using. Now, characteristic impedance. This is the impedance of a cable defined as the resistance offered to the flow of electric current at a particular frequency. So that is key, at a particular frequency. The frequency always matters. All right. The characteristic impedance is the impedance of an infinitely long cable where the signal never reaches the end of the cable and hence cannot bounce back. I know, characteristic impedance is kind of on the funky side to me. It's one of those things that isn't quite straightforward, at least in my opinion. The longer your cable is, the more inductance and the more capacitance you're going to have. And the reason we have that, I think we talked about this last class, is remember, two wires being close together, there is a potential voltage difference between those. And by not having them touch and have them be very close together, they create a small capacitor which holds the voltage. All right, that's all a capacitor is. It's metal plates on two sides with an electrolyte between them of some sort, preferably as close as physically possible for a capacitor. And the larger the surface area, the larger the capacitor, the more charge it can hold. All right. So electrical wire going through a cable like this is no different. All right. It is still just electrical cable sending those signals. So yeah. So the longer the length, the longer the wire is. It's really kind of go back. Way too far. There we go. So yeah, crosstalk, and this is our last main issue with copper cable. And this is the electrical interference in the form of signals picked up from a nearby cable or circuit. So that's what crosstalk is. Now you also do have interference on here, that you could have inductive interference, those types of things. In theory, having like an Ethernet cable run right next to a power wire, not really a great idea, because the power wire is constantly alternating power up and down and could induce a current flow on your Ethernet cable. By using twisted cables, which is what the book was talking about, UTP, unshielded twisted pair, that in theory helps cover that some, but it's not an end-all solution. All right. Yeah. Now, questions? Not at this point. Okay, cool. So, one of the big data carriers that we use is coaxial cable. All right. And this is a cable with concentric layers. So here we have, you can see the nice layers. So we have a copper wire right in the center with a bunch of insulation around it. All right, now that insulation is a precise distance. All right, there is a precise amount of insulation there so that the electromagnetic field of the signal would be contained within it. So in theory, any signal that this propagates out from from alternating and things like that, dissipates completely inside this insulation here, in theory. All right, it should never actually make it to the copper mesh that is surrounding it, but it probably does in the long run. Now the copper wire in coaxial in the center is solid. All right, it's always going to be solid as far as I know, at least. The copper mesh around it actually is literally that. It is a mesh. All right, it's like a braided tube of thinly strands wires. Now they do have them, as you can kind of see in here. There's like a row here, so they kind of took some flat stranded wires in a group, and then they took those and they interweaved them. All right, but it is going to stay that way. It's all going to be nice and flat and things like that. It's going to be stranded. It's not going to be like a solid copper core, because if it was, it wouldn't be flexible at all. So that's why we're using a mesh there instead of a solid core. But it's still providing exactly what it needs. And that's it. The construction ensures that any signals are going to stay constrained with inside of this. And that copper mesh is going to protect it from having external interference come into it. So that's what's going on there. This talks about being 10 base 2. All right. 10 is going to be our speed in megabits per second. All right. Base is saying that this is baseband, which means multiple frequencies can be used to transmit the same data or multiple different data at the same time. And 2 is the distance being 200 meters. All right. Now, not all copper coax, as far as I know, is going to be 10 base 2. I mean, if you think about this, this is the main thing that is carrying internet probably from almost all broadband internet connections or baseband internet connections from houses back to the internet. All right, this says base. I'm a little confused on that base there. Um, anyway, if you think about broadband, most broadband comes into your house, so that's how most of this is going to be done. Um, this cable is stable in terms of its electrical properties at frequencies below 4 gigahertz. All right, that's a pretty high transmission speed that you could transmit up to. Um, but we aren't normally operating at that frequency. Some advantages: broadband coax can be used to translate voice data and even video, and it can actually do it all at the same time, right? When we think about high-speed internet, when it first came out, it was cable companies, and it's the same cable that you get your TV on. Some houses will have 2 different coaxes coming into their house, for one for TV and one for internet. But a lot of houses don't. It's just a single cable that comes in. They go through a splitter, and you have TV coming out the one side and internet coming out the other. And it doesn't matter which one is which. It's just how the modem talks to the cable and how the TV box talks to the cable that it knows, oh, this is the internet or this is the TV. So no difference there. The cable is relatively easy to install, and it is relatively flexible. It's not like it's just super limp in it. It's not like this, as far as I'm concerned, where it just bends and flexes all around. But it is still a very flexible cable in the long run, which allows them to do things. And some of this is even rated for direct burial, which is how the internet at our house is. It's just, it came out and they had this little, motorized device that physically like cuts into the earth, shoves the coax cable in, and then moves along, and it just keeps doing that, just pushes the wire into the ground more and more and more, which really actually kind of quaint neat to watch in my opinion. Coax is reasonably priced compared to other types of cables, so something to think about. Some disadvantages. I copied the same thing twice, so I don't have any disadvantages on the top of my head right now. I'd have to get back to you on that. Anyway, it's not the most flexible thing in the world. Probably some disadvantages. It's analog traditionally, which could be an advantage or disadvantage depending on how you want to look at things. So a lot of give and take is always what it comes down to. Here I just have a little example. This came from my modem at my house. That shows you the different, like how we have multiple channels going out the exact same cable. All right. So I had a whole lot more than 4 channels locked. I don't remember how many I had. I only just took a picture of the top 4. For my downstream. My upstream, that's all I had was 4. All right. So here you can see the different frequencies and things like that. So that'd be kilohertz. So we're at 0.591 gigahertz, 0.567. So you can see the different frequencies that we're transmitting at. All right. Which I always find to be quite interesting. And notice here they actually do have the power in decibels listed, which is nice. And here's some more decibels related things. And I'm assuming these corrected are some errors that are being transmitted that were received and said this isn't right, and they've said it was corrected somehow. I'm not sure how. And then here's our modulation standard going listed over there. So really kind of quite interesting as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, so I really like that you can see the different frequencies. And again, these are all going down the same cable. In theory, at least in my mind, at least, every house that's connected to this would be on a slightly different frequency. Now, if we look at this channel 1 and channel 2, there is 6 megahertz between them, and there is 6 megahertz between channel 2 and 3, and that would be 12 megahertz between 3 and 5. So every 6 megahertz, there is a new channel that can be connected to. And said in my mind, every household should be on a slightly different frequency, sending information back at least to the main router or whatnot. So, and then upstream again, channel 1, 2, 3, 4. And what are our divisions there? Those are bigger divisions. I don't know if this is just what I'm locked at. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, so we have what, almost 70, 64. 64. Yep, 64 between them down there. And this is still gigahertz. Notice how much slower. Oh no, that's a huge difference. That's 24 to 176. That's a huge difference. Oh no, to 17.6. Okay. I bet. Anyway, notice the difference in speeds here. So our download, we have a much higher frequency, by a power of 10 or more. I mean, here, I'm only at 38, 37 here. And at our lowest one up here is 56 or 567. So, you know, almost a 20 times difference there. Not quite, probably 15 thereabouts. And the main reason that we're doing that is higher frequencies have higher data rates. All right. Um, since we are, if every peak of, every wave goes up and down, if only the peaks are carrying the information, then the more peaks that we have, the more information we can transmit. So this can transmit 15 times more information than this can. So kind of an interesting thing to look at when we're dealing with these internet is, okay, well, the higher the frequency, the better it's going to be. However, for data transmission, lower the frequency, though, the better penetration it has. And we'll talk more about that when it comes to wireless. Now, the connector that we're using with coax, at least at home, is the RG6. All right. These connectors are, and all of these coaxial cables, and it's not just that we're using with what we call coax. What we call coax, we're used to, is RG6. All right. But there are other versions of coax out there that are smaller gauge, bigger gauge, all sorts of fun things. But all of the connectors for these are very specifically designed to protect the shielding, so to maintain that connection. So if we go back to this video for a minute, or this screen for a minute, that connector comes back to probably like here. All right, and let's see if I could kind of draw this. So it does something like that. And you have some sort of crimp or screw-on connection. So the outside of that connector actually hits the braided wire here. And if we, again, go back forward, you see this wire sticking out here? That's the wire in the center of the wire. Like it doesn't touch that. You actually strip that off first, and you leave that hang out a quarter inch or 3/8 of an inch or whatever that is, and that just hangs out there. So when you're hooking one of these things up, that little tip of the wire is the same continuous wire that goes all the way through the coax cable that you're using, and I always find that kind of interesting. All right. Yeah, so this outside right here somehow, or maybe it's right there, probably it's right here, is actually crimping onto that shielded connection somehow. They do have some of these that like just screw on, so the outside has some threads in it that's meant to like grip onto that that braided wire. Some of them are like a crimp connection where you put it on, you're supposed to a crimping tool that you use that will put little indents on 4 of the sides. There's all sorts of ways for this to work, so really depends on the type of connector that you're using. So, questions? All right, moving on. Twisted pair. All right. Twisted pair. This is another type of copper, and this is what is inside of standard Ethernet cables. If you guys give me a second, I will. There we go. So here I have some just boring old standard copper wire. All right. And if I go ahead and just strip the end of this off, you guys should see my desk and all the random things that are on it. Probably as the teacher of this area, you wouldn't be surprised, but still probably be interesting for you guys to just randomly see my desk. So if we look inside of this, you can see, I can get it to focus on that. Oh, having a normal picture probably would have been better, but manual focus mode. I go past it now. There we go. That's as close as I can get to my lens. Actually, let's try. There, now you can see it nice and somewhat clear. So you can see how there are, if we actually count them, there's 4 different types of wires on here. There's white, orange, orange, white, blue, blue, white, brown, brown, and there's a white, green in the background there. This one happens to have a little divider for all the wires to keep them separate. And then there's also this like hair looking stuff. All right, that, oops, sorry, hair looking stuff. Here we go. There we go. There you can kind of see it there. That stuff is meant for there we go. And I'm back. That is meant to give it strength, so when we're pulling this through a wall or something, that we're not putting stress on the actual wires, or as much stress on the wires. We're actually, in theory, using that to pull this through the wall. But anyway, so we have twisted pairs. So those wires that are the same color, or white, brown, and brown, they are twisted together. White, blue, and blue are twisted. White, orange, and orange are twisted, and white, green, and green are twisted together. Typically, there are 40 twists per meters, or roughly 12 twists per foot. I have never actually counted that. It's there. UTP is unshielded twisted pair, and hopefully you've already guessed that STP is shielded. I know, crazy. All right. Anyway, so the twisting of associated pairs and method of transmission reduce the interference from other pairs of wire throughout the cable. So by twisting these together, we're helping reduce the interference coming from other things. And this just makes our life a bit easier in the long run. So it keeps us from having data communication problems. Now, we did talk about different types of categories here. So as I told you, the white cable by me is Cat 5E. This is actually Cat 6. All right, and I believe Cat 6, one of those main differences between the two is that piece of plastic, that little plus sign in there. That's one of the big differences. Cat 1, this is going to be your voice grade, so this is probably like your typical telephone wire. Cat 2 is also voice grade, but we can get up to 4 megabits per second with that. When we start getting to Cat 3, we're now at data grade, so this is up to 10 megabits per second. Cat 4 up to 16. Cat 5, officially it's only supported up to 100 megabit per second. Unofficially, you can get up to 155 megabit per second, and this is over the entire length of a wire. In theory, by making the wire shorter, like, and I believe the length of the wire typically is 300 meters, or roughly, I think it's 300 meters, or roughly 1,500 feet. So quite the distance there. But anyway, so like Cat 5, you can only get 100 meg over 300 meters. Well, if you're only going to run like a 3-foot section of Cat 5 wire, you can still probably get a higher speed out of it if your equipment supports it. Cat 5E, which is again what this wire is, all right, is data grade, and it's gigabit, so we can have to 1,000 megabits per second. Cat 6, I think, goes to like 2.5 gig or 5 gigabit. And Cat 7, I don't know what the speed on that is, but that one is actually shielded. So that is some of our differences there. I don't know why this 3 is supposed to be an E. I don't know why I had a 3 there. So just ignore that and make it an E. And the E stands for enhanced. Ooh. Oh, you guys can't see my screen right now. There we go. The E stands for enhanced. So that means we're modifying the cable slightly to get better transmission speeds and things out of it. Some advantages of it: it's easy to connect devices to a twisted pair cable. All right. Traditionally, we're using the RJ45 connector, which we will talk more about on the next slide. If an already installed cable system, such as telephone cable, has extra unused wires, to be able to use those pair from that system. So you need to be kind of careful about doing that. There are some warnings. We also have power over Ethernet, PoE, which is over twisted pair. So we're actually able to send power over a standard Ethernet cable and still have at least 100 megabit per second, if not gigabit per second speeds. Not quite sure if you can get the gigabit, but you still get at least 100 meg per second, which is, again, plenty fast for things that you'd want to power with power over Ethernet, like wireless access. Well, maybe wireless access points, you still want the full gigabit. So you probably can still get it. But security cameras, those types of things. Some people even have, there are even power over Ethernet lights. Like you just put lights in the ceiling of your house that are plugged into an Ethernet cable, and all it gets power from the switch wherever that is, which is really kind of interesting in my opinion. Um, Shielded twisted pair does a reasonably good job of blocking interference. Unshielded twisted pair is very inexpensive. You can go buy like a 500-foot roll of this stuff, or even longer. I don't know how long it is, from Home Depot or Lowe's, like just on the shelf. You can just go grab one. The UTP is very easy to install. There are two different types. So this type that I have here that I cut the end off of, as you can see, when I take this and I bend it, it holds its shape. I guess I should go back to my normal camera for you guys. So if I bend it, it holds its shape. All right, so that is actually a solid core wire in there. So that type of UTP, or unshielded twisted pair, is meant to be installed in walls. All right. If you're going to have a stranded wire, that is meant to go from the wall outlet to a device. All right, which is what this one is. So this one doesn't really hold its shape. Like it flexes back, you know, it just kind of does whatever. It's got a little bit of memory in that location from being curled up, you know, kind of. Yeah, that's how it was stored. So it's got a little bit of memory from being like that. But otherwise, this is stranded, and it kind of just has a mind of its own when you're running it. So not meant to be installed in your walls. So this stranded, you may also hear called patch cable. It's meant to, you know, patch from the panel to the computer, or the patch panel in the server cabinet to the switch or router or something like that. So you may already have UTP installed in your house. Make sure it's going to work properly and it meets your performance specs. So if you're like, hey, I've already got this Ethernet cable, let's run gigabit internet through it. Well, can it actually handle that, or are you going to get some funny interference that is going to cause issues in the long run? So even though it's already there, you may have to upgrade it. Ethernet cable, if you're ever installing it somewhere, it's worth just installing whatever the best spec is that you guys can afford, or even maybe can't quite afford. So like if you're going to be installing at this point, I would do 6E. I wouldn't buy 5. I wouldn't buy 5E. I'd do 6E right at this point, because that kind of future proofs you. All right, there are already people who are using 6E. Now it's again businesses, but if you're going to do it in your house, I'd probably put 6E in. It's going to cost you a little bit more, but it'll probably save you some hassle in the long run. Some disadvantages: the shielded stuff is a bit bulky and sometimes difficult to work with. And the unshielded is more susceptible to noise interference than coax or fiber optic cable is. So something to kind of be keeping an eye on. Some problems that may arise: you may have attenuation, which is, as we talked about, the signal degradation. And sometimes you can get the signals to travel farther than their rated distance of 300 meters. So it's just something to kind of think about. You may have cross pairs. So when someone made the connectors, all right, you may have something funky going on in there. You may not have quite the right cable set up. So you do need to make sure of that. You may have split pairs, or maybe they're not twisted like they're supposed to be. Your connectors may not be the right connector. There are actually different connectors for solid and stranded, which I did not know until yesterday, which I was like, really? I've always just been using the same connectors, so that's very interesting to me. So there are different connectors, and if we would look very closely inside this, which I'm not going to even attempt to do right now, but there's little pins that we put the wire in the connector, and then you have a crimper that pushes the connectors actually into the wire. The single pierced ones, the ones that are only like a solid little thing, are for stranded, and 2 piercers are for solid. So little slight difference there. You could have some termination issues, which you guys will probably come across. One of the labs that we will do later this semester is you guys, as teams, will make both a Ethernet cable. So we're going to make a little patch panel cable. And then you're also going to work with a patch panel of terminating the bare wires to a patch panel, and then putting a cable end on the other side. And we will have you guys test it. And unluckily, this is one of those things that you only got to do once. I mean, not for the lab, but you only can crimp a connector once. You can't like shove it all together, go, okay, we're good, crimp it, test it, and go, oh, terminal 1 isn't talking. All right, let's take it back apart and fix that. No, it's cut the end off and try again. All right, which is kind of annoying, but that's just the way that the game goes. All right. But yeah, that will be a lab that we will be doing later this semester. So you could have some termination issues. You could also have some crosstalk or some interference coming through. So most likely your biggest issue is going to be cross pairs. Now, on that note of cross pairs, here we have our RJ45 pinout. All right. And what I am showing you over here on the screen that you guys cannot see is specifically the T568B. All right. Now, why am I showing you the B instead of the A? Well, the B is the one that I was taught back when I was in high school. I'm sure the A standard was around too, but B is the one that I was taught. B is the one that this cable happens to use. It really doesn't make that big of a difference as long as you are consistent from one connector to the next. So here you can see the pattern of white, orange, orange, white, green, blue, green, white, brown, brown. So I always find it interesting that's white, orange, orange, white, green, blue. Like basically these two are switch. And I can't draw for the life of me. This one and that wire. So pins 4 and 6 are overall basically just the switch. Everything else is the same. All right. If you were going to do the A pinout instead of the B pinout, you would do white, green, green, and then white, orange, orange. So basically blue and the white blues, these two stay the same, those two stay the same, and just green becomes orange and orange becomes green. Again, as long as you're consistent on both ends of the connector, it really doesn't matter which one you're using. So that is just something to be aware of. Now, if you do a B on one side and an A on the other side, because you guys are partners and you forgot to talk, so one of you did the one pair and then the other pair, that's what's called a crossover cable. So normally, if you do the same pinout on both sides, that's what's called a straight through cable. So it is meant to connect a computer to a switch, to a router, to something like that. Where if you do a crossover cable, it's designed to connect a computer directly to another computer. All right. So on one side, pin 1 would get connected to pin 3, and the other one would be 2 would connect to 6. So if you have pin 1 and 2 are your transmit, and pins 3 and 1 and 2 are your transmit, and pins 3 and 6 are your receive. By crossing them, we now have one side's transmit connected to the other side's receive and vice versa. So kind of an important thing to just make sure you don't screw that up is really what I'm saying. Now, again, maybe you want a crossover cable. I actually made a little adapter, which is somewhere in my box of goodies over there, that takes a normal patch cable or straight through cable, and it has a place to plug it in, and then it basically just does a little crossover. So I can take any straight through cable, add about 6 inches to it, and now have a crossover cable, which is was quite convenient a long time ago. Nowadays, many computers you can plug a straight through cable in and go directly from one device to another, and the hardware is smart enough in them to know that, and it's able to deal with it. But just something that you need to be careful of. Also, RJ stands for registered jack. All right. And traditionally we are using an 8-pin 8 contact. So you can see there's 8 pins and there's 8 contacts. Telephone is, I believe, a 4-pin 4 contact. So it only uses basically those middle 4, there to there. All right. And you can actually plug a telephone cable into a RJ45 jack. All right, obviously only those middle 4 cables get connected, but it is doable to be done. So just be careful and keep your eye open for that. So something you might run into. Now, when we talk about termination, all right, it is very important to terminate copper wires. All right. So electrical signals travel through copper wire at approximately 2/3 the speed of light. That is 2 times 10 to the 8th meters per second, or 124,000 miles per second. Seems high. Yeah, it's probably right. So as that signal travels at high speed, when it hits the end of the cable, it's going to bounce back some. So that's called a reflection. And if we haven't terminated the end of your cable properly, it's going to cause problems. So on the left down here, this is our unterminated side. So you can very obviously see our dips for our highs or our lows, whichever these dips would represent. On the right, you can see what happens if you don't have it terminated and you're sending data out. Now, this isn't a big issue with networking because Like Ethernet cables, you have two plugs. But when we start getting to like, if we go back to the RS-232 or something, or some of our other networking that we'll talk about later this semester, device net, those types of things, where you can have multiple devices on one cable. So you'd have your master here, and you'd have your cables run out, however many wires you have, and then you'd come down and you'd tap on for your scanner, and then you tap on for your printer. And if you don't terminate this end, those signals will travel down, hit this, travel back, and then be messing up the signals for these two that are trying to read them. So we need to terminate our stuff correctly. So most of the time we're using a resistor for termination, and the value of that resistor is going to change depending on cable length, type, a few other things. So the suggestion always is to just follow the documentation for your protocol. If it says to terminate with a 1.5K resistor, you terminate with a 1.5K resistor. If it says a 200 ohm, you put a 200 ohm in there. All right. And basically what that resistor is doing is it's making the wires think that they never end. So this would come on and come on, and we'd have a bit of resistor there, and we'd be done. And all we're doing is when the electrical signals hit the end, we're going to convert those to heat, and that way we'll keep it from being reflected back down the wire. So, yeah, termination is very important. Now, if you have really short wire runs or a very slow data rate, termination isn't as big of an issue. So that is just something that you want to keep in mind. It's a bigger issue for longer because, if we're sending this data out here and it has to travel 1 foot and then it reflects back, it's traveling so fast that, it's not the biggest issue in the world. But it's when your cable gets long that all of a sudden these things start getting sent, and it's just bad news bears. So make sure you're being careful there. Yeah, okay. Now, this leads us to our next topic for today. And actually, I think this is a good place to stop. So we only got covered copper today, which is overall fine. We will talk about fiber optic and wireless more next time.